The Venus Project Team Speak Seminar, September 4th, 2011.
This is Fresco speaking. I want to try to indicate to you just how the resource-based economy operates. It is not from the bottom up or from the top down. It's based upon surveys, meaning if we have the resources, we can build a resource-based economy. If we don't have access to certain materials, people want to know how things are distributed. In other words, if we don't have enough to go around, who gets what? That's why we must overcome scarcity. To the degree that scarcity exists, you will have problems. You cannot overcome problems by legislation or consensus. You have to have the material to make a resource-based economy work. And until that occurs, you're going to have problems. I've indicated that many times. Many of the questions as to whether or not Fresco or some elitist group makes decisions either from the top down or the bottom up, it's none of those systems. We do a survey first to see what we have, and then we divide that amongst the population, telling them about the shortages we have and the problems we have regarding it. What people will do will depend on the availability of resources. If you can so concentrate the research department in the Venus Project to work on overcoming shortages, that's our major problem. If we can overcome shortages, then we can begin to think of ways of solving problems. If you cannot overcome shortages, you will have problems. So somebody once asked me, who decides who gets what? In a shortage system where you don't have enough resources to meet those needs, it will occur on the basis of prejudice, bigotry, and the habits pre-established prior to the Venus concepts. The Venus concept doesn't have a set of laws that exist, that you do this or you don't do that. If we don't overcome scarcity, we cannot operate the system efficiently. So the first thing that has to be done is groups of people or individuals have to work on problem solving. Many problems, such as conflict resolution, if we learn to solve problems in an abundant system, we would have little conflict. If we don't have abundance, it will always result in problems. I hope you understand that. So when you ask me questions, what will you do if there's a shortage of materials? I can't answer that because I'm not in charge of that. People will do what they have to do. Do you understand that? Until you have availability of goods and services, I believe that the Venus Project can arrive at the availability of services in the shortest possible time. Once that is accomplished, we can begin to move forward. Until we resolve the problem of shortages, we cannot move forward. There are many different things people ask. What if two people completely disagree and have different approaches to problems? We can try both systems, or 3 systems, or 10 systems to determine that which consumes less energy and is the most effective. If we try a system and it doesn't work, then we'll continue to work at it to see if we can find better ways of operating the system. It has nothing to do with what the group feels ought to be done. It's based on resources only. We do not make decisions. We arrive at them based on existing resources. There appears to be no real other way of doing things. That's when people come along and say, make the decisions. It isn't decision makers. It's arriving at decisions based upon what you've got. It's like being in a lifeboat with limited water. Do you give everybody a glass of water, or do you give everybody water depending on their weight and moisture, evaporation of the body? In other words, how do you decide that? People tend to give each person an equal amount of water in scarcity. That does not make sense. If a person weighs 300 pounds and another person weighs 79 pounds, giving them equal amount of water does not equally distribute that water in the body. So totally different systems, meaning surveys and technical people who are qualified to arrive at decisions by using technology. In other words, there's just no room for personal questions. You always ask, well, if two guys love the same girl, then the girl has to make the decision. She wants to be with Bob or Harrison. That's not a question of society. And if you have limited resources, who gets what? Whenever you have limited resources, all decisions will not be based upon scientific scales of performance. They'll be based on personal prejudices. That's why we must overcome scarcity to get away from personal preference. If you have difficulty with that, consider this. Irish people tend to support Irish people. Jewish people tend to support Jewish people. Afro-Americans in large numbers tend to support Afro-Americans. Only in abundance can you consider the decision systems as more appropriate. Never perfect, always more appropriate. We hope with the passing of time, decisions will become more appropriate and in the constant state of change due to new information which we acquire through experience. Does everybody have equal opportunities in the Venus Project? No. There are different people with different backgrounds. The more experience you have in any particular field, you'll be called upon to advise. I'm talking about real experience, hands-on, working at something. So if you've been doing research for 40 years and another person doing it for 2 years, yes, you can sit down and talk, but you really can't exchange ideas because a person with 40 years of experience cannot transfer that in a discussion, a single discussion. The whole idea of equal time in a debate is senseless because many people have been exposed to religion for 40 years, and an atheist in a debate with a preacher will lose if the debate occurs in a church. The atheist may need a week against 1 hour of the preacher because everybody else has been exposed for years to certain value systems. So equal time doesn't make sense at all. So most of the standards of today's system or social systems are based upon obsolete standards. And most of the questions asked are based upon obsolete standards. So when people write questions, they should first read the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy. Become familiar with the Venus Project layout, why we do things the way we do. So you'll understand how to arrive at similar decisions based upon research, not opinions.
Is there any room for elitism to evolve, maybe like levels of knowledge, people having different levels of knowledge or involvement in society? Would there be elitism with those
No,
people?
there wouldn't be elitism in that they get any more than anyone else. The distribution of resources are made available to all people if we achieve that level of social operation. For example, people keep bringing up the idea of shortages and how that's handled. First of all, with the advent of nanotechnology, we can overcome all shortages. According to nanotechnologists, they say we're 15 years away. Let's say we're 30 years away. It would take 30 years then to be able to make anything through nanotechnology. If you don't know what that is, it is taking atoms and arranging them in whatever molecular structure we need. Whether it be food, you won't have to grow food. You won't have to have hydroponics. You can arrange atoms into the molecular structure of carrots, peas, beans, or anything you want to, without any agricultural or hydroponics farming. You can arrange things in the molecules of fish. if you want to do that. If nanotechnology doesn't come about, then we will have other systems that have to be used. Each system will depend on resources available, not from the bottom up or top down. All those nonsensical statements. In other words, if you put 500 passengers in an airplane that's designed to carry 100, it won't get off the ground. So all decisions are made based upon the physical equipment you're working with or the environmental resources available. They're not made by Fresco or any other person. They're arrived at by studies and research.
Spoken language greatly influences thought processes and the way we explain physical phenomena. How is it possible to design an entirely new language if we still use our old notions from an old language?
If we fail to devise a language that's not subject to interpretation, you will have problems. We have to devise a language that's not subject to interpretation. When you read the Bible, you're subject to your background and experience. Different people read the Bible and interpret it in different ways. All that people cannot share ideas unless they have parallel values. The idea of sitting down talking to another person does not take into account the background of the other person and what portions of the conversation they're able to comprehend. You cannot sit and talk to people. It's always interpreted in terms of the background of the other person. Only devising a language that has common meaning and educating people so they understand. When they're talking about agriculture, they understand that they're 50% qualified or 10% qualified. So the questions they ask have to be within. They can't be questions that take a long dissertation. In other words, sometimes somebody comes up to me and asks me a question, and they want an answer. Sometimes there are no answers. There are requested experiments that have to be cited to show how you arrived at that decision or conclusion. Everyone will have to arrive and explain to other people how they arrived at that conclusion. There are no answers for people that are not qualified, that don't have experience in the field. There's retraining, sharing new values with them. Yes, all that's real.
People ask me, after the Venus Project achieves all its aims and proposals, will people be happier?
If you want a simple answer to that, the answer is yes. But the detailed answer is people will never arrive at a satisfactory answer for anything. They will always be working on things and updating them. In other words, 2 years from now, your laptop will be smaller, lighter, faster, and store more information. But is there a limit? There's only a limit to what man can do. And if man's research shows him new ways of doing things, the limit is extended. I see no limitations to what humans can accomplish.
This person is asking about the mechanistic concept of life, and are human beings, are they no more than complex machines, robots?
No, they differ from robots because they have feelings. Most robots will carry out a program that you put into the machine, and they don't reflect upon things. If a robot saw a man lift off the ground through levitation, the robot wouldn't say, "How interesting, I'd like to study that." Robots only carry out the programs you put in them. Robots have no feelings, no reactions. If you work a robot night and day, Saturday and Sunday, it doesn't ask for a day off. It doesn't say, "Hey, give me a break, will you?" This is not part of machine technology. However, in areas like surgery where you have organ donors, in the future we will try to replicate living tissue into the design of the organ that's failing in a person. Now, somebody said, who gets what? In scarcity, there'll be poor distribution, which is not going to work well. If we can produce more organs than people call for, that will be more adequate. So we have to approach the time when we are able to produce more than what is called for. That's the only time you get rid of problems. If you cannot produce sufficient amount of organs, there will be problems. There will be jealousy, envy, all those things as to who gets the organ. This is not something I advocate. This is something that will occur. I'm sorry about that. That's why we have to work on the production of an abundance.
Will people have identification numbers issued to obtain goods?
No, that wouldn't be necessary. They have a chip which they carry with them, and the chip tells whether that person has acquired that goods in the past, or if they try to take more than they really need, the chip will govern that. They don't have a number or identification card.
Do you think that will only be necessary in the beginning?
Yes, only necessary during the transition from a monetary system to a resource-based economy. It will not be necessary to monitor people as such, put cameras in the building and monitor everything they do. That may occur during the transition, which I have nothing to do with. The transition is the necessary things that will occur during a transition. And that's when you have multiple value systems based upon personal opinions. You will have problems all through the transition, and there's nothing we can do about it except try to inform people to be patient and await the time when we can produce in abundance, which is usually a couple of years.
When Jacque talks, he says that in Venus practice, most crimes would disappear. What types of crimes wouldn't disappear? Why and how can they be dealt with?
Degenerative diseases of the brain, or lack of bodily functions due to genetic damage. That type of problem will occur, but that can be detected real early to prevent it from happening, preventing people from assassinating or killing other people. That can be detected real early. So we probably won't have much to do except genetic damage. Those are the kind of problems that may exist, or brain damage due to genetic problems.
Who will do the maintenance and service of all the infrastructure in a resource-based economy?
During the transition, when something goes wrong with your plumbing, you don't call a baker, you call a plumber. When something goes wrong with your electricity, you call an electrician. So there will be people capable of dealing with any kind of breakdown. But the real problems that may occur on a larger scale are tsunamis, earthquakes, hurricanes, and if that occurs, you have to have all nations that produce a surplus in goods to store that goods in the polar region as dehydrated food or other pieces of equipment needed. So in the event of an earthquake in any major country that had joined the Venus Project, we will make things available immediately by the special contingencies group, which don't have to go through any group of people and win their approval. They have the right to act immediately, access the materials necessary, and deliver them. They have access to the means of delivery. They have access to allocation of materials to any region. So they can work immediately.
Without a grading system, how will we determine the most knowledgeable from the fields such as engineering?
How well their system works. That's the only way. If an engineer designs many bridges and they turn out to be more corrosion resistant and stronger under varying conditions, we use that knowledge. Only by how well the system works determines how long it's used.
What would happen during and before the transition into a resource-based economy to people that are in jail or prison? How will people react if they will be aggressive or violent?
Well, first of all, if they're aggressive due to background, most of the newer behavioral sciences will approach these people and free them of their guilt, because all governments are corrupt, basically. All people in the monetary system are basically corrupt. So I would say that if you can remove their guilt and treat them decently, meaning give them exposure to whatever they lack, provide that exposure without a price tag. And if you do that, you can free most people from prisons. Prison is the worst thing you can assign a person to, because prisons do not work on people. They do not modify their behavior. They are not equipped to do that. They're just equipped to prevent them from participating in society. We will enable them to participate, and we have many different approaches to many disorders which are aberrations picked up in the society they lived in. When you're moving toward a resource-based economy, or you accomplish a resource-based economy, no one is deprived of anything. It's deprivation that creates problems.
Could you explain where the industrial area is located in your city design?
At present, it's on the outermost belt of the city.
Yes, actually, Jacque we haven't shown any of that in our designs that are up there now.
I have it, right.
Right, I know you've done a lot of them, but we haven't exposed it to the internet yet.
Well, and say it again, industrial plants are located in the outermost ring.
What are your thoughts on debt-free currency as a step towards a resource-based economy?
No, this will not work properly.
You don't see it as a bridge towards it?
No, I do not.
Okay. This person is asking, do you have designs for apartment interiors?
Yes, lots of them.
Hundreds and hundreds of them. Some were exposed in the film Future by Design by William Jacque. That film was made before the Zeitgeist films. You can actually see it on Netflix. You can get Future by Design by William Jacque on Netflix. What are the mechanisms for recycling food and where they're integrated into the city?
Well, first of all, food that is not eaten is immediately packaged and canned and fed to and used as the food is prepared. There's really so much that can be done. When you sit at a table, the menu lights up. Then you scan. If you're diabetic, the food is adjusted to your condition. You don't have to say, I'm diabetic, I can't eat this stuff. In other words, we build that into the system to whatever extent we have knowledge of at the time. Nothing is frozen. The question is your city utopian? It is not utopian. There's no such thing as utopia. We're always modifying things. There are no final frontiers. In food recycling, the food that's issued to the person, if the person doesn't consume all that food, then the food is reprocessed, canned, and stored for other times.
What are your views about legalizing cannabis or hemp to start a resource-based economy?
I don't deal with those problems. The society itself will have to deal with those problems. I'm just concerned with how to sustain life and build a sustainable society. Those are the side pockets based upon your background. Whatever people will do at that time, I have no control. I don't know what people will do, whether they'll legalize it or not. I don't think they'll legalize anything that's harmful to the human body. A lot of research will have to be done before we arrive at an appropriate decision for narcotics, marijuana, or any other drug.
Well, there are a lot of other uses for the plants, for clean sources of energy, building materials, running energy systems.
What's the question?
Are your current constructions in Venus, Florida, able to resist hurricanes? And were they designed for a specific wind category?
They're based on how much money we had at the start. We never built what we wanted to build. We only built what we can afford to build.
They're extremely strong, though, and they're overbuilt in terms of any regulations for hurricane loads.
The zoning board said that They think our buildings are well built and overbuilt. This is true.
What if you come up with some new invention or technology and want to protect it by a copyright under the Venus Project?
Protect it from what? There's no money, there's no rewards, financial gain, no recognition, no medals for any achievement. So you don't need awards. Everyone gets whatever they are interested in. They have access to a library that has books, tapes, machine parts, art, illustration equipment, musical instruments. You have access to anything like that. So there's no need for giving any special person any special privileges.
Is it better a dome or a round house for interior space, or is the square more efficient for interior utility?
Well, actually, in individual houses, a dome or curvilinear structures are much stronger. In the future, I see large apartment houses or large dwelling systems rather than individual homes. Because in the larger system, you can have gymnasium, art center, music centers, shopping centers, all built in one building, medical, dental services, all in one building. Living in an individual house makes it a little more difficult. You have to take your kids in different directions to the educational institution, which is built in the apartment. Schools, everything would be put in one building. The building would be self-sustainable. If you have individual homes, that wastes more energy. During the transition, we might have to have that. That depends on circumstances and availability of resources.
If you were 20 years old now, considering the way things are moving with the monetary system, which seems to be collapsing, what would you do? What would you study to be useful in the future? What do you think is relevant to focus on and why?
I would become a generalist and study the science as near as I can get to human behavior, sociology, anthropology, the history of civilization, and a brief introduction to the physics and basic science, because this is the closest thing we have today to sustainability. The methods of science are not perfect, but they're much closer than any other system.
This person is asking about Scott Keller. Scott Keller lives in Tampa, Florida, and he's running for president based on the resource-based economy. There are a lot of people that I have spoken to around the world who are doing the same thing. I think Colombia, Venezuela, somebody talked about doing it in Sweden a couple of years ago. And I think it's a good way to get the information out there. We are not against that at all. If it's a platform for people to speak about this, and hopefully where the ideas came from.
Meaning talk about the Venus Project.
If groups live outside the Venus Project and have what they consider ancestral or sacred grounds, what they do not wish to disturb, will the Venus Project agree to leave these areas alone and not mine them for resources?
Only if it doesn't threaten the lives of people. If the system that they advocate doesn't threaten anybody in terms of availability of resources or availability of water or anything like that. Only if another system or a tradition threatens other people, we will intervene. Through education, through films, never force. Never physical force, armies, navies, or police. There'll be no prisons, no police. Because we've taken away most of the conditions that are responsible for most crimes.
Have any government agencies or the government shown any interest in the Venus Project, secretly or openly?
Not yet.
Do you base your designs on function of what's in the building?
No, we base our designs on what's available. Because you can't design something in advance of knowing what's available. We base all our decision-making, from architecture to the mass production of objects for the home, food, everything else, on what's available. How much arable land do we have? If we have insufficient amount of arable land, then we have to work on synthetic fertilizers. And if we work on that, we have to study what effects that has in a negative way on human beings. Nothing is released unless various studies are made. In other words, we don't build a new city. We say if we build a city, positive effects of that city on that environment. And then we do another study, the negative effects of that city. What are the harmful effects? What are the negative aspects of it? In other words, you have to study all sides of the coin in order to come up with appropriate answers.
Most of your building designs seem to have white surface and black windows. Is there a reason for that?
No, that's because we're in Florida and we like to reflect most of the heat. We can't use chromium surfaces or mirror surfaces. That will interfere with aircraft flying above the city, producing intense reflectivity. So we painted white only because if you paint the darker the color, the more heat it absorbs, the more insulation you need. So it's not based on some arbitrary decision. It's based upon minimum expenditure of energy for maximum social comfort.
I think they might be talking about maybe the 3D modeling as well, or any of your proposed buildings. A lot of the details we don't have because we need more 3D help with that for detailed work. And so we haven't represented a lot of the detail in some of the models or animations.
I do have prefabricated kitchens and furniture in the exhibition dome.
Mm-hmm.
To study various branches of science and technology, become well versed in robotics, electronics, building, architecture, because we can use all those professions, all that type of training. Any of the physical sciences. If you study business administration, investment banking, or advertising, it will not serve the Venus Project in any way whatsoever.
How will people be identified to the system?
With chips. The chips are implanted in earrings, rings, or whatever you wear. Or you will wear some object that has your complete identity in it. And that is so that people will understand what your field of operation is, your specialty, your knowledge, so they know where to find you in case you're needed for any public service.
Okay, you mentioned there wouldn't be elitism. How would we know if a specific elite isn't hoarding scarce resources? How would the rest of the public investigate this kind of scandal?
You don't have those problems. Those are old monetary problems based on a society of scarcity. When we raise children in the new society, they're raised with a totally different value system. If people do not identify with the Venus Project, they will not join us. So they have their independence, they can live any lifestyle they want to. We believe that eventually most people will join with the Venus Project and unify the world toward common goal. You can't force that.
How are our personal aesthetics shaped within our culture regarding fashion and music?
That has to do with exposure. That is up to the musicians and the majority of people. Whatever they think they want during the transition, they will deal with. But in times to come, we will study the effects that music has upon people, and we will study both the positive and negative effects. And we'll try to understand what music is. Today, very few people can describe what music is. In other words, if a man came from Mars, or a being from Mars, and they said, "What is music?" What would you say? It's a series of sounds so arranged as to produce a pleasing effect in those people that find it to be pleasing. They tell us today many things about music, They tell us things about songbirds. I don't believe birds sing. I believe they make certain sounds. And if we had associated their sounds with a song, we call them songbirds. I knew of no birds singing. These are so many nonsensical things in your society to have to be exposed. Try to figure out what is music and why do people all over the world enjoy certain kinds of music. And there's some kinds of music people do not enjoy. And there are many birds that make terrible sounds, that repeat those terrible sounds over and over again in short sequences. What do you call those birds? Noisemakers? What kind of title do you put? Just different animals make different sounds. If we like the sounds, we identify with it. If we don't, we just don't pay much attention to it. The same with music. If you grow up to like certain sounds, in some countries, people sing and they don't have the voices we are brought up to admire. They sound more like they're squawking. But that depends on the culture you're dealing with. It's very hard to describe music. Try it sometimes.
What would be the number of citizens you expect to have in the first experimental city?
Well, we can go from several thousand to 1 million, but each group is divided into smaller segments because you can't deal with too many people at the same time. You might be able to deal with 20 people at the same time with similar values. So people will be categorized in terms of the value systems they identify with, so you know who you're talking to. You don't get up and lecture on electronics to fashion illustrators. I hope you understand that example.
In the best case scenario, how long would it take to build a city if you have unlimited resources?
Possibly a month and less. In the Venus Project, after it's established, we can build automated systems for extruding buildings, and that would take us less than a month if we have those facilities. Without those facilities, we can't estimate time.
Okay, I think that's everything for today. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Jacque and Roxanne, for your time as usual. Really appreciated.
Thanks again, everyone. See you next Sunday.